Okay, so just so this week's portion. Normally, when we start the portion, we did the Rashi's the previous year, so we start in the middle. But today we're going to start at the beginning because there's very few Rashi's in this week's portion, and we want to try to go through all of them. And the reason why there's very few Rashi's is, as Rashi says several times, I already explained this portion when it was commanded, because the Torah commands the building of the Mishkan in Parashas Teruma, and here it is the construction of the Mishkan. So a lot of the difficult terms are already explained by Rashi. This week's parasha is also going to be we're going to take out two Torahs. We start the concept of the four passages which we discussed with Roe Shir this past week, that we read special four paragraphs, four portions from the month before Adar, Rosh Chodesh Adar, till the week before, from the week before Rosh Chodesh Adar till the week before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And the order is, this year we're going to start with Parashat Shkolim, which is actually the Torah portion we read last week, yesterday, which is the first few verses of Parashas Kisisa, which talks about the obligation to give a half shekel. And the reason why we start now is because everybody had to give their half shekel by the month of Nisan. The messengers would go out on Rosh Chodesh Adar and say, now's the time where everybody has to pay their communal tax of a half shekel. Obviously, it's not that much money, a half shekel, but it was a highly significant. And that money was used for communal offerings beginning from the month of Nisan. It was placed into what's called shofarot, collection boxes. They were called shofarot because they looked like a shofar, and that they were narrow at the top so people couldn't stick their hands in to collect the shofar. And that's what it was, shofarot. And okay. So chapter 35, verse 1. Vayakhel Moshe es kol adat b'nei Yisrael vayomer aleim ela advarim asher tziva Hashem lasot otam. So Moshe gathered the people, gathered the community, and he said to them, these are the words that Hashem commanded to do. So Rashi tells us, Vayakhel Moshe. First of all, Rashi tells us two things significant here. Macharat Yom Kippurim. He tells us the chronology. When is he gathering them? The day after Yom Kippur. What happened on Yom Kippur? Moshe came down the mountain. This was the very first Yom Kippur for the Jewish people. The very first Yom Kippur for the Jewish people was when Moshe came down the mountain with what? With the second set of tablets. And that's when the Jewish people were completely forgiven. They came down the mountain with the second set of tablets and they were completely forgiven. And at that point, he gathered them together. So Rashi is telling us this was the very next day after they're completely forgiven. Kishayar minahar, and the word Vayakhel is an expression of he caused them to be gathered. So how did he gather them? They were gathered through his words. He caused them to be gathered. He instructed them to come and gather together. Vayomer, and then what is the first thing he said to them? He said, these are the words that Hashem commanded them to do. 6 days you shall do work. Uvayom hashvi, and on the seventh day, Yelchem Kodesh shall be for you holy. Shabbat Shabbaton Hashem. It shall be a holy Shabbat to God. Whoever does work shall die. Okay, so right away we are wondering what's the connection between Shabbos and the Mishkan. Why is there a connection here? So Rashi tells us to teach us a very important point. It seems random. Why is he placed before them the commandment about Shabbos before the commandment to build a Mishkan? to tell them, well, Mara she'enon docha et Shabbos, to tell them that the work of the Mishkan does not override Shabbos. The work of the Mishkan does not override Shabbos, meaning to say that you're not allowed to build the Mishkan on Shabbos, and it also tells us how do we know what we're not allowed to do on Shabbos? Whatever was necessary because construction of the Mishkan was what was required on Shabbos. What will be prohibited to do on Shabbos. So anything that was necessary for the construction of the Mishkan was prohibited to do on Shabbos. So that's why Rashi says there's this connection. And that's based upon the Talmud. Of course, others draw other explanations and more homiletic, that the Mishkan is about creating a sacred space, and Shabbos is creating a sacred time, and the two go together. It's about using our own creativity to create a sacred, something sacred, either space or time. Of course, if you want to read about the creation of the sacred time, the best way to do this, I think, to read Heschel's The Sabbath. If you've ever read it, do you know the story about Heschel's The Sabbath? That did I tell you the story? That the publisher hired him to write a book about love, and he comes in with the manuscript of the Sabbath, and they said to him, "No, we asked you for a book about love." He said, "That's what this is." That's what Abraham Joshua Heschel. Okay. So then it states, you're not allowed to make a fire in all your dwelling places on the Shabbos. What does that mean, that you're not allowed to make a fire in all your dwelling places on the Shabbos? It seems so random because there's so many things you can't do on the Shabbos. There are 39 prohibited activities, and randomly, the only ones we're talking about is that you can't make a Moshe, come in here. By the way, if you want some fresh hot cholent in the other room, you can help yourself. You saw that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, good. Shkoyach Moshe. So you know how to make a fire in all your dwelling places on the Shabbos. So the question is, why of all the activities is this the only one singled out in the Torah that you can't do on Shabbos? Doesn't talk about anything else on Shabbos. Yes, it does. Implicitly, there's the prohibition of collecting wood on Shabbos, but there it's ironic because the person is put to death for collecting wood, but the Torah never says what his actual violation of Shabbos was. We don't know why he was gathering. Therefore, about the Mekoshe eats him, the one who gathers the wood, the Talmud has a debate. What was his exact prohibition? So why does it single out fire? So the Gemara in Yoma, the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Ayin, Amud Aleph discusses, actually appears twice in the Talmud, it's not just in Shabbos, but the Gemara there discusses what's the reason why it's singled out. So Yeshmi Rabosinu Omrim, there are some who say Havara Lalav Yatzas. There are some from our rabbis who say that Havara, that the kindling of fire was put out there to teach us that the punishment for fire is less than the punishments for all the other prohibitions. All the other prohibitions, if you violate the Shabbos, you get a much more severe penalty. Whereas for hello, Kobe and Akiva, did you help yourself to some cholent?
No, but I was tempted.
Is the Yetzer Tov tempting you? Wasn't it Yetzer Hara?
No, I'm a little bit of a diet.
What? You're on a diet, good.
Otherwise,
all right, Baruch Hashem. So there are some of our rabbis who say that the reason why it's just a specific prohibition is because the Shabbos is a lesser prohibition than all the other prohibitions. All the other prohibitions, they have very much more severe penalty. Whereas Shabbos is just viewed as a regular prohibition, just a violation of fire is just a regular prohibition, violation of which gives you lashes. Why is fire just a regular prohibition? Maybe because fire is is considered to be maybe it's not as labor intensive. The Gemara doesn't say why, but there's an alternative, or the Torah doesn't tell us why. Alternative explanation, Kobe, is that yesh that Shabbos was singled out because it's there to tell us a division. What's the division? Well, there it's not 100% clear from the Talmud. Excuse me. So it's not 100% clear from the Talmud, but it seems the most common answer is that and if you violate many different prohibitions on Shabbos, you're going to be receiving a punishment for each and every one. So if you do it unwittingly, you'd have to bring a korban chatas for each and every one, for each and every sin offering that you violate. Because we have a principle, anything that is separated, it's not just to teach us about itself, but about all the prohibitions. Okay, so now that we said about Shabbos, does Rabbi Steindl say anything about why Shabbos is singled out here? Also, we already learned about Shabbos last week.
No.
Rabbi Steindl doesn't add anything? I would have expected him to, because he's always so insightful, but I guess he did not have space.
It reminds us that lighting a fire is not difficult. It wasn't because it was such a big strenuous thing to do.
Right.
It reminds us.
And it's not difficult now, and it wasn't difficult then.
He says that the act of lighting fire was easy, even in biblical times, not very different from igniting one now. Furthermore, this category of labor includes the use of an existing fire to light a new one, which is certainly a simple act.
Right. So why is it prohibited? Because the Torah says so. Vayomer Moshe, Al Kohadat Bnei Yisrael Lemor. So Moses said to all the children of Israel, saying, Zeh hadavar asher tzivah Hashem lemor. This is what God commanded you. Rashi says, He commanded me to say to you, Nidiv libo. He says, V'chumei etchem truma Hashem. Take for yourself an offering to God. Kol nidiv libo. Anyone who's generous of heart, Yiviyah as trumas Hashem, should bring an offering to God. Zahav v'chasef u'nechoshes. Gold, silver, and copper. So, verse 5, Nediv libo, al shem shel libo nodvo, because his heart makes him generous. Therefore, he's called Nadiv Lev. He's called the generous of heart. And I already explained Nidvas HaMishkan U'Mlachto, that what does this mean? The contribution to the Mishkan, Rashi says, I already explained this where they were given. So basically, Rashi tells us a person who's generous is called the one who's generous of the heart, because the heart is what makes us generous. And then Rashi is saying, I'm not going to explain everything, but I already explained it earlier. So we're not going to read all the verses, because Rashi already says, we've already explained it earlier, but we're going to go to the verses that Rashi comments on. But I'm going to read a few verses now, because Rashi says you have to give oil for the lamp and spices for the Shemen HaMishcha and the Ktoras HaSamim and the Avnei Shoam, the stones of the Miluim, and verse 10, V'chol chacham v'chem, everyone who's wise amongst you shall come and they shall make everything that Hashem commanded. Es HaMishkan, es HaLov, es Mechseyo. So what are they supposed to make? The Mishkan, its tent, its covering, its krasav, its hooks, its krashav, its beams, its brichav, its cross beams, its bars, its amudav, its pillars, its adanav, its sockets. But when it says in verse 11, it says they're supposed to make the Mishkan. This was very moving to me. What does that mean? This is what Rashi says. It says you're supposed to make the Mishkan. How does Rabbi Steinsaltz translate that? Chapter 35, verse 11. Because I'm going to share with you what Rashi says was very moving to me. What does Rabbi Steinsaltz say?
Just direct translation?
Yeah. 35:11. How does he say?
Yeah, it's the tabernacle, the linen, the wool, it serves as the ceiling, its tent, the goats that hides its servants, tents over the tabernacle.
Okay, wait, no. I just want to say the top. So he translates it as the tabernacle, as a mishkan, but that's not what Rashi translates it. Rashi translates it as the tabernacle spread, meaning the covered of over the roof. but we already have in the end of the verse the tent and its coverings. So what is this referring to? Rashi tells us this refers to, there were different covers of the Mishkan. There was the upper cover and the lower cover of the Mishkan. So Rashi says this refers to the Yiriot Tachtonot and Nirot B'tocho. This refers to the lower cover of the cover, the lower panels of the covers that were only visible inside of it, inside the tent. That's what's called the Mishkan. Now let's just, so Rashi says the word Mishkan is a technical term. When it says he commanded them to build the Mishkan, that's a larger term referring to the whole sanctuary, but it's a technical term referring specifically to the inner cover of the inner panels that made up the roof. And these panels were visible only to the people who were inside. Now, how many people went inside the Mishkan every day?
3 or 5, depends how many sons of Aaron were alive still.
No. How many went inside every day?
Yeah, I'm saying Aaron and his 2 sons, or Aaron and his 4 sons.
No, there's only one service that happened. Well, they had to go in, but there was only allowed to be one person in at a time. Only one person was allowed to be there at a time in the Mishkan. You couldn't have more than one person. So at that moment, the Mishkan was visible only to one person. And so it's also a reference here. The Yiriot Tachtonot Hanirot B'tocho is called the Mishkan. The lower panels, which is visible from the inside, that's what's called the Mishkan. The Mishkan is what's visible only from the inside. And that's, to me, that our job is to build a Mishkan, and it's visible only from the inside to one person, to us, and also to God. And that's, to me, the message here of this powerful Rashi. Yeah, Rabbi Yosef.
That's a beautiful teaching. I never recognized that, but what I'm asking is, when Uzziah, the king, came into the Devir to do the incense, why did the high priest come in with another 80 priests to remove him if there was only supposed to be one person at a time?
First of all, he was not a Kohen, so he had no right to go in there anyway.
Of course,
So
I'm just saying,
he was
81
breaking the
people
law.
to remove one person.
He was breaking the law. So once you're breaking the law, you have to do a show of force. Number 2, there were many times that they broke the law in their actual service. I'm just saying what the Torah commands. The Torah says only one person at a time is allowed in there. So that they didn't exactly listen.
There's nothing new.
Exactly. Nothing new, whatever, but you can't ask a question from their actions when they were all violating it, is the point. There's never supposed to be 80 Kohanim going in. Okay. So now we say, okay, next. So now that we read that Rashi, we say, and he put there the OLO, this is the OL, the tent of goat skins that was made as the roof, and we'll say on its cover. And that was the Tachash, which we discussed. And then Parochas Hamasach, Rashi says, the ark and its poles, and the cover for the ark, and the curtain for the screen, the Parochas screen. Rashi says this refers to Parochas, the word Parochas, which we have upstairs. We have a beautiful Parochet for the ark. That refers to a mechitza, refers to a partition. Kol davar hamagain, anything which serves as protection, bein milamala, whether it's above, bein mikeneged, whether it's facing something, is called a masach, uschach. So we see from here the word schach means a protection. It means protection. Okay. The table and its poles and all its utensils and the bread of the lechem hapanim, This is called the showbread. Or that, but Rashi doesn't call it showbread. Rashi calls it the bread of surfaces. Rashi says, I already explained it. So then why is he explaining it again? But he's already explained it. But he says, Al Shem Shayu Lo Panim, Lakan Lakan. It had surfaces going in each direction. Shu Asoy Kamin Teva Prutza. It was made like an open box. So basically, it was covering all the surfaces, like a box that was not closed on the sides. Okay, and then we had the utensils for it. As Menorah Tamor, the lamp of illumination, Veskelet, utensils, as Nerusah, it's bowls, Shemen Amor, the light of illumination. Rashi says the Shemen Amor also needed wise people because it wasn't simple fuel. Shehu Mishuna Mishar Shmanim, Shemifurash B'menachos. This is different from other oils because they wanted to make it pure. So they had to wait for it to ripen on the top of the olive tree before crushing it. Okay, now we have to verse 15. That's Mizbacha Ketoris, the altar of incense. Where was this altar, the altar of incense? That was in
like they had to have a wiseness of their heart. That doesn't mean they had to. What your Rashi sounds like he's saying is like you had to be knowledgeable enough to know how to pick the thing at the right time. But isn't there more there that you had to have a Chachmei Lev? You had to have like a more sensitive person to be able to be involved in this.
So you're asking.
That means
I think you're asking a very good question, but I don't think it's what it means because the word "lave," heart, like we say, we're going to learn something by heart, So the word heart, they didn't understand that thought came from the brain. So they associated thought with coming from the heart. When rabbinic literature, they say to have something in the heart, it means that you're wise.
Well enough.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it doesn't mean
like you have a good like you have to have like a different heart. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, basically that's the point that they didn't have they didn't do autopsy. They didn't have the understanding of which parts were controlled by the brain and which parts were emotions so that's why they assigned different body functions to different organs.
Okay.
But it's what
So
we call today extra virgin oil.
I think it's even better than extra virgin olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil is the first pressing, but I think this is even stronger than that. It's the stuff that was like oozing out before it was even pressed. Yeah, and now I have my friend Alan Berger here, Eliezer Yisrael, so he can bear witness to my greatest one. I'm not gonna say my greatest because I have so many, but one of my greatest fails in the history of my rabbinate was when I thought that I could get olive oil by putting the olives in a garbage disposal and crushing in the sink garbage disposal and grinding them up and getting out olive oil. Remember we tried that? And we broke the garbage disposal and Alan tried to fix it, and of course he did, but I broke the garbage disposal by just sticking all the olives in with their pits. And remember those days, Alan?
That's a nice idea.
It didn't work. It did not work.
That press.
We got a hydraulic press also to try and make olive oil.
Press.
We actually went out and made a whole hydraulic press to make olive oil. It also was a total failure. The ancient way is the best. We
trained it all the welding.
Yeah, we tried all these different ways, but
You need a donkey.
yeah, that's what we finally brought in like a donkey and some stone. Yeah, those are much more effective way than using a garbage disposal. I promise you, garbage disposal did not work. So yes, you need some intelligence, and it's a technique. So then the Talmud says, okay. So the Talmud says, okay, the altar of the incense and its poles and the anointing oil and the Torah Asamim, the incense of the spices, the entrance screen. Rashi says, this is the vilon shalafnei hamizrach. This is the curtain that faces east. That they didn't have any beams or spreads there. There was a part that faced east of the Mishkan where all they had was a curtain. That's what it's referring to. That's what this is referring to. All they had was a curtain there. Okay. We'll do one more. So it's
Broccoli.
okay. So now it says it's Mizbach HaOlah, the altar of the Olah, and then Mechbar Nekoshes, and then there was this like lattice, copper lattice vest around the altar. Asher Loet Padavet Kol Kelavet Takior Ve'et Kanon. Then they make the altar with its poles, and its utensils, and the basin and its stand. Rashi says, Et Amudav et Adonai. This courtyard is called here in the masculine.
No, that's next verse, Rashi.
It's the next, right. Eight Kalei Chatzer, the curtains of the courtyard at Amudav at Adonai, its poles and its sockets, and Masach Shara Chatzer, and the curtain of the gate of the courtyard. All right, so basically, at this point, there's so much we've studied, so we're going to stop here to daven mincha, a big shkoyach to everybody for this geschmack learning with everyone today, and shkoyach to everybody.